Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Ducky Aquatics. In today's video, I'm going to be covering breeding guppies. Let's get into it. So obviously, selecting the breeding stock is the most important thing that you're going to have to do for your guppies. And it comes down to having a keen eye for observation of your fish. So take your time to select your breeders. If you already have some guppies, that's fine. Trios work well if you're just trying to line breed or if you're starting out your breeding process for your guppies, because it makes things a lot simpler just watching 3 fish. So select your nicest male. It doesn't necessarily mean the nicest in terms of color. You want a really good body shape so that you don't want the tail going too skinny from top down view, and conversely when you're looking from front on, you don't want it to taper in as well. So you want males that have a very even body shape. I'll put some slides up showing some males that I think are quite good. Usually the males will be more colorful than females, but because guppies have been so heavily bred now, you can get many females that are just as colorful as the males. So I will put up now as well the difference between males and females. So these are the qualities that I find make good males and things to look out for that are male guppies, and vice versa. These are what good females should look like and some of the qualities that they will have. But what you really want to look for in your fish is good swimming behavior, good feeding behavior. So guppies are usually hungry most of the time that you see them. They should want to actively look for food when you're feeding them. They should swim well. So if they're in a tank that's over 30 centimeters deep, which in freedom units is about a foot, they should be able to swim to the bottom of the tank and up to the surface without any issues. You can get some fancy males that will really struggle later in their life cycle with doing that, because their fancy tails will cause curvature of the spines or the tail will weigh them down. So usually when you're selecting your breeders, you want to get males that are a little bit younger. They should still show the characteristics and the colors of the line that you want to breed. Or if you're just doing skittle guppies where you're mixing whatever together, you just want to pick your males that have really good body shape and are swimming easily. You want to avoid fish that are huddling towards the surface. So if you see the head pointing up towards the tank like this and the tail pointing down, and they're just kind of rocking like that in the corner, unless it's obviously their feeding time and that's kind of what they do when you feed them, that's a different story. But if they're just doing that with no food and that's what they're doing, you're seeing a couple different guppies doing that, avoid those ones at all costs. They usually have a bacterial infection or a fungal infection, and they are probably not too long for this world. So breeding behavior in guppies, usually it's the male just chasing the females. That's mainly because a lot of breeders will separate the fry when they start to sex out to grow them out faster. So when males are kept separate from the females, they do tend to have more of a desire to chase them relentlessly, which is where you get people telling you advice that you need 2 or 4 females per male guppy. I don't find this always to be true, but that's usually what will happen when the males are kept away from the females. They will just constantly harass and hound those females. Eventually, if they're kept in a colony tank, you do find that behavior settles down a lot, and 1 or 2 males will try to fend off the other males from their girls, and they will do somewhat of a courtship dance where they try to dazzle the females and scare away their male rivals, which I do have some footage of with my Moscow blue guppies. And it's something that I first initially noticed with endlers. Endlers are great at doing this. The males always display for females and try to fend off other males. I don't know if other people have noticed it with their guppies, but it's certainly something I've noticed when I keep my fancy guppies in a colony tank. So condition your fish for breeding. Food and temperature are usually the 2 driving factors for that. Of course, water quality does have a huge part to play in that as well, but I'm just going to assume if you're already trying to breed guppies, you should know how to have your water suitable for them, which just in general is they like carbonate hardness to be up a bit higher. pH, they can actually have a wide range. So if your local area has a little bit lower, 6 for pH, you can go up to 8 on pH is absolutely fine. If you're getting guppies already used to your local water, you don't need to worry about the pH as much, just more so keeping the water conditions stable. So you don't want huge fluctuations in temperature. Obviously a fluctuation of greater than 3 degrees in either direction can cause a fish die off. So you want to keep the temperature stable. If you're trying to maximize breeding and grow out for your guppies, warmer water will do it faster, but it does shorten their lifespan. And in my personal experience, it can lead them to have a little bit more stress. And when you're getting guppies that are a little bit more stressed, they're more susceptible for fungal and bacterial diseases in particular. So I like to keep my guppies around the 22 to 24 degrees for breeding purposes. That will extend their lifespan, so you can get 3 to nearly 4 years out of a guppy by having them on the lower side. They can go a little bit lower than that, but again, just like having the guppies at a higher temperature, having them too low will put a lot of stress on them as well, which can affect, especially when it's colder, their feeding behavior, so they can become malnourished if they're in too cold of water. So for foods, anything but flake food. So flake food, I think, kills more guppies than people realize. It can be the cause of the fish wasting away because they're just not getting the nutrients they need, and some people may identify the wasting of that fish as either a bacterial infection such as fish tuberculosis or TB, or internal parasites, which is also a huge killer of guppies. But if you're only feeding them flake food and or algae wafers, they're not going to get the protein that they actually need, because especially for female guppies, which are technically perpetually pregnant from their first mating, they do require a lot of protein in their diet, which is also why I like to keep crushed coral in my tanks as well, because as that starts to dissolve, it does put more calcium and stuff back into the water. So if you're not feeding them enough food, at least it tries to help preserve their skeletal structure. Otherwise you will get females that will get kind of bent backs, which does happen with age as well, but for young female guppies that shouldn't be happening straight away. So the foods that I find work best is live baby brine shrimp. I'd say that and live Daphnia are the #1 foods that you could be feeding your guppies, followed closely behind by live blackworms. I don't use them so much because I find them disgusting. I don't like touching live blackworms, it's just a me thing, but they do work really well, and I don't want to have worms all through my refrigerator, so they do require more work in my opinion than keeping a hatchery of brine shrimp or even a Daphnia culture, which after you've had Daphnia for a while and you've gotten used to them, they are very easy to culture and a great food for the fry and the parents to condition them for breeding. The next food that works really well is frozen food. I know Nick from Keeping Fish Simple has had a hell of a time with bloodworm. I personally have never had any issues with feeding my fish frozen bloodworm. It could be I'm using a different brand, but frozen bloodworm works really well. You can get frozen brine shrimp, which they also love a lot as well. The one thing that is a bit hit and miss in my opinion is the frozen Daphnia. So I don't think the frozen Daphnia is actually Daphnia in Australia. I think it's just minced up clams or something. And my fish tend not to go for that as readily as they would for frozen brine shrimp or for frozen bloodworm. And the next one that is really good to always have on hand if you are trying to condition for breeding is freeze-dried food. So freeze-dried blackworms, which I don't have with me. I have some footage that I'll be able to put up for you. And freeze-dried brine shrimp are really good because they come in a compressed cube form, which you can break up and spread out between a few different tanks, and you can create the nice little feeding circle on the inside of your tank, which does show your fish quite nicely as well. And the benefit of that is you don't need a refrigerator or anything. They have a sealed container they come in, and it's just a great food. If you're on the Gold Coast and you're looking for someone that's carrying it at a reasonable price, Mick at Glass Case Creations, he's got a heap of it there. I highly recommend just going into his shop to have a look. Then another food that is actually quite good is decapsulated brine shrimp eggs. So I tried my first lot of decapsulated brine shrimp eggs yesterday, and it kind of ended in disaster. So the food that I had was from last year's auction. I kept it in the fridge and only opened it yesterday, but it had been in the fridge, which we've had a blackout since. So it did lose its cold temperature. And then obviously the fridge coming back on, I think the food actually spoiled. So I did end up killing, out of my couple or 100 at least guppies in these 20 litre tanks, I did actually end up killing about 8 of them, which is a really low number considering how many fish I have in here, and I did not do the proper etiquette for putting them into these tanks. It was just kind of scoop them out, dump them in, good luck. So that's definitely on me, but decapsulated brine shrimp eggs are a great food to have. You just rehydrate them for about 10 minutes before you feed, and even your smallest fry can eat them. So it's a great fry food, and it's a great food to condition the parents as well. So breeding setups, there's a heap of different breeding setups you can do for guppies. The tank that I've got behind me, the one I set up in my last video, is a colony tank. So it's where you keep the males and the females in together. You can breed them like that as long as you've got enough hiding spaces for them. So I like to use live plants because I also hate doing water changes. So having a densely planted tank using stuff like guppy grass, crypticorns, foxtail or hornwort, bulbitis, which is an unsung hero for breeding both guppies and keeping cherry shrimp, because it does grow its like the little fern leaves quite tight together from the main trunk, creating little spaces like that, and then of course the leaves will fan out like that as well. So once you've got a bulbitis really established, all the fry and your cherry shrimp can hide in there without any issues, and it's just a really good plant to have in there. And it looks really nice when you have it growing over rocks or driftwood and stuff like that. But any plants you have in there that are cover will work for guppies. So you think of it in layers. You've got your surface, you got the mid-water, and you have your bottom. If you've got some Amazon frogbit or duckweed at the top, that's great cover for the fry. Then in the mid-water, if you've got something a bit taller, say Amazon swords, or you've got Vallisneria, which is a terrific plant to use, even hornwort, because that'll occupy the mid-water and the surface, and then leave the bottom open. You can put crypts down the bottom which grow a little bit taller, create a nice little canopy where they'll kind of fan in, and little cavities where the fry can hide in. If you don't want to use live plants, another way you can do it is using fake plants. Plastic plants can work really well both in a colony tank as well as a dedicated breeding tank where you separate your pairs or your trios and putting them in there. And the reason why plastic plants can work so well, the parents can't get into the nooks and crannies of the plastic plants as easily as they can with live plants, because the plastic plants have less give. So that's why you'll see quite often a lot of breeders will have the fake plastic grass that kind of comes in a little square foot mat, and they'll have it on the bottom of the tank, and then they'll have a piece upside down floating, because that's perfect coverage for the fry to go and hide, especially if you're breeding lines like albino guppies, which are an absolute pain in the ass for eating their fry. It's like they have a vendetta against all of their children, and having somewhere like that for them to hide works really well. The other method you can use if you are using a colony tank for breeding is these hang-on breeder boxes. I have these on my website, but at the moment everything in my house is trashed, so I don't know where they are. So if you do order them and it takes a while to come out, it's because I can't find them. But all they do is they hang on the outside of the tank with this going on the inside. You hook up the air pump which forces water through there. You can either put your heavily pregnant female in here. If you do that though, try to scoop the female out in a cup and not a net, because if you use a cup, it's a lot less stressful for the female guppy. Put her in here, and then once she drops her fry, you can take her out, and you can either raise the fry in here, or you can have this as just the dropping bay and then move the fry into a dedicated fry grow out tank or tub, depending on where you are. So if you're going to use a breeder tank, this method you can also change. So if you have nothing there for the overflow, the female will drop her fry in here, and there's just a little grate that will grow across here. The gaps will be large enough that the fry can get through, but the female can't. The fry should hopefully get pushed out into the breeder tank or the grow out tank for the fry. I've done that with endlers, and it worked really well with endlers. Some of the guppies, it was a bit hit and miss because the females would eat the fry before they ever got out into the main aquarium. But if you're going to have a dedicated breeder tank, you can use the Tupperware method. So this is another hang-on breeder box. You just hang it on the inside of these hooks. Female will drop fry straight through the gaps in the bottom here. And then once she's done that, you just take her out, raise the fry into the tank, and that's really easy. But if you want something a bit bigger than this, You can get pretty much vegetable colanders. You can get square shaped ones, especially if you go to the cheap stores. They've got all different ones. A lot of even the makeup containers for a lot of women's beauty products, or even laundry containers, a lot of them will have more mesh type containers that you use, and just float that in the aquarium. If you don't want to put the breeding guppies inside there to drop fry, just by having that floating in there and putting some greenery in there, or even a shredded up plastic bag if you want to do that, will attract the fry to go and hide in there, and the parents can't get to them. So once they've dropped the fry, you can then move the adults out and then turn that into a fry rearing tank. If you're going to use tubs, it's the easiest way in my opinion to breed fish, because as you've seen in many of my videos, I've got heaps of IBC containers, ponds and tubs, and I absolutely spam out guppies when I do that. The only issue with that is you lose a lot of quality control with doing that, so you do need to more regularly grade your guppies when you do that, and that's where stuff like this comes in handy again, using your vegetable colanders. You can scoop up a heap of the fish into there. You can raise it up out of the water and lower it a few times, and that pushes the fry through, and you can grade the adults then just with a little shrimp net, which is again worth its weight in gold when you're trying to grade your fish. So just a little shrimp net, got your adults in there. All the ones you want to keep breeding, you put back into your tub, and all the ones that aren't showing the desirable traits you want, you can then move them on. So if you're trying to sell your guppies, you can do that. Otherwise, if you're using them for feeders, again, you can separate the ones you want to use as feeder fish as well. Now, grow out time for guppies is about 3 months. Depending on temperature, again, it might be slightly longer depending on how much you're feeding. So a good average time to get a fry from just the little speck that you see to, oh, this is a really nice guppy, 3 months should be the turnaround. At the 3 month period as well is when you should be selecting your next lot of breeder males. So guppy gestation for the adult females is between 21 days and 30 days. If you've got slightly cooler tanks, it will take longer for the females to drop the fry. So you don't always need to have your males. So once you've had your studs impregnate your females, they will hold the sperm from those males for quite a long time. They do use majority of the sperm from the most recent mating. So I like to, after the first lot of fry have raised up at the 3 month period, pick out your next lot of males for breeding and use them for another 3 months, so that you're selling still 6 month old male guppies, which should have a few years left in them. And if you're selling them to people who want to try and breed them as well, they're still young enough that they'll breed really well for other people as well. Otherwise, if you've got heaps of room and you want to keep those nice males, just keep them and keep on breeding with them. So that's another segue into the female guppies. So we've just talked about male guppies. The female guppies I usually keep until they die, which can be between 1 and 4 years, just depending on circumstances for those guppies. I do notice a phenomenon that a lot of other breeders have noticed as well. So my friend Nat, that Nick has done a great video up at his place as well, has noticed this as well. Quite often when you have large females, you'll see like your biggest females, you'll have 6 or 7 like that in a fish tank. They all get in sync with dropping their fry. They'll drop a heap of fry in one go. Then the next few days, one by one, or all of them within 2 days have dropped dead, but the fry and the males are still alive. I don't know why that happens. I assume it must be either an evolutionary thing or a hormonal thing. So they've released hormones into the water, and then they've detected that and realized maybe the tank is at capacity or the body of water is at capacity. So they kind of just give up on life and die, so that the fry have more space to grow out. Because if you have a lot of adults in with the fry, it's a lot harder to grow out the fry. So if you're breeding in a colony tank and you're feeding live baby brine shrimp in the same spot every day, you're noticing they're dropping heaps of fry, but the fry aren't growing out. The reason why they're not growing out is the adults are screening out small fish from eating the food. So you do need to spread an even coverage of food over the top of the water so that everything gets a chance of getting something to eat and growing out. The same for the fry rearing tanks as well. There's always going to be 1 or 2 outliers that get more food and will grow faster, and it's important to separate them and keep everything roughly the same size in the tank, otherwise they will outcompete the smaller fish. So some pro tips for fancy strains if you're line breeding guppies. There's a phenomenon, Nat, again, he pointed out, and he learnt this from other Thai breeders. I kind of noticed it but didn't really make the connection. When you're looking at guppy fry, occasionally you get some that are almost jet black. Doesn't matter what line you're breeding, you'll see them and they're really dark bodied. Separate those ones out. Usually they don't do well and have an underlying health issue that bring down the rest of the guppies. So it's better just to separate them. You can try raising them, because if you're obviously doing a darker bodied strain such as a Moscow black or Moscow blue, even the blue galaxies are quite dark guppies as well. Just to hedge your bets, you never know, it could be an amazing fish that's going to grow out from that little fry. Separate them out, but more often than not, they do not make it. And with keeping your genetics, so you'll find with some fancy strains, they spit out both blonde body and the gray blue body. I like to breed both of them together. So you'll see my platinums have that I've got half blonde bodies with the tuxedo pattern happening down towards the tail. I keep them in there for genetic diversity. Usually when people buy them, they don't want those ones, but I keep them because they do still spit out really healthy, nice platinum guppies. So even as well, another example is ivory Dumbo ear mosaic guppies. They will spit out some red-tailed males occasionally, and I find when those red-tailed males mate with the females, those females will spit out more of the desirable actual ivory-tailed males with the nice blue-white tail instead. So it's important to remember that. Don't be too harsh on your culling or grading of your fish, because if you do that, sometimes you actually set yourself back further. And that, I think, has covered everything that I wanted to say on there. If I've forgotten something, which is entirely possible, this is my third time trying to film this video. I think this is probably going to be the one that gets uploaded, but if I've missed anything or I haven't covered something in enough detail that you wanted to know, please leave a comment and ask away, because I'm more than happy to try and help you. We can always make another video. And also, if you're breeding guppies, leave a comment, let me know what strain you're breeding, because I always like to know what other people are breeding. My personal opinion is most people are not breeding albino guppies, because they're like me, they're experiencing that they're a pain in the ass to breed, but I could be entirely wrong. So let me know what you're breeding. I'd love to hear what's going on in everyone else's tanks. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.